We are in Luke chapter 12. Almost forgot half a second. Luke chapter 12. And we're going to pick up about verse 44. We're talking about this conversation that Jesus has been having with his disciples about the importance of being watchful. Kind of ties into what we've been talking about this morning. And in particular, he uses this parable, and he's been using this parable throughout this narrative. And then he'll share more in a sense as it relates to it, and then he'll give a lesson about it. And then he'll share a little more as it relates to it, and he'll give a message about it. And so we want the idea together this morning of how important it is for us to be being diligent while we wait for the Savior's return. And that's kind of where we left off in our study this past Wednesday. Notice in verse 43, he says, "Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Of a truth I say unto you, that he will make him ruler over all that he hath. But, and if that servant say in his heart, My Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to beat the men servants and maidens, and eat and drink, and be drunken, the Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looketh not for him, and at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him asunder, and will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. And that servant, which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes." Now, again, he is using a parable, okay? Keep that in mind. He's not necessarily advocating. He's simply using this idea that if there's a lord over a house, and he gives assignments to the servants in that house, and then he leaves for a period of time, expecting that work to be fulfilled and accomplished, and he comes home, the servants who did their job will be rewarded for that. The servants who did not do their jobs will be punished for that. They all understood that, by the way. They understood that concept from the manner in which their world worked, culturally, socially. They understood the parable, that you've got to be diligent to fulfill the role and work that the servants are given by the master of the house, the Lord of the house, if they want the reward, or they'll face severe consequences. And so Jesus is trying to simply portray for us that God has work for us to be doing. There's things to be fulfilled and purposes to honor, and we've got to be actively doing that while we wait for the second coming, the return of Jesus, so that when He returns, He'll find us diligently pursuing the works and purposes that He has established for us, and not find us slothful in that effort. And then He ultimately says that those who knew what the job was supposed to be done and refused to do it, there in verse 47, what will they receive? Many stripes. There's greater consequence that they face here because they understood and knew what the responsibilities were, and yet they chose not to do it. And the greater consequence comes to those individuals. Now, we've had this conversation once before in this study, but we'll look at it for half a second this morning. But the implication in some people's eyes is well, that Jesus is talking about degrees of reward and punishment. The better you are, the greater your reward in heaven. The less you do, the worse your consequence and condemnation will be. And I don't think he's talking about degrees. He's using a parable that everybody will understand, that in order to illustrate the point that consequence comes when you fail to honor the obligations that you have, reward comes when you do honor the obligations and responsibilities that we have. And that, to me, really seems to be at the core of what Jesus is trying to illustrate by using this storyline in order to get that. He does mention in verse 48, "But he that knew not," in other words, the one who doesn't know what he was supposed to be done, "did not commit things worthy of stripes, shall be beaten with few stripes. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required, and to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more." Now, I believe that we could probably fairly make an argument. If he's directing this to his immediate disciples, he's trying to get them to see, and I think we talked a little bit, somebody may have brought this up Wednesday night, but he's trying to get them to see, listen, I'm giving you all a whole extra load of responsibility. You all are going to have greater responsibilities than just anybody else that might come into the kingdom. I have chosen you. I have selected you. I have not been able to I didn't choose any. You're the guys I chose. And the only thing I know to tell you is, with those responsibilities comes the need to honor it. And I didn't give them to you just to give you privilege. I didn't give those responsibilities just to be able to, so that you could have something special. I gave you those because there's work to be done, and you need to honor and fulfill those things. Thoughts or questions up to that point? I just didn't quite finish that narrative Wednesday night. I thought I'd come back to it. Go ahead, Brian.
The Hebrew writer in chapter 10:31 says it is a fearful thing to fall in the hands of the Lord. Yeah. You're held to a higher standard, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, I think
we need a healthy respect for the fear of God. And to fall into His hands, especially knowing what we're supposed to do, knowing what we're supposed to be fulfilling, and refusing to do that, then it's a scary thing to fall into the hands of the Lord under that circumstance.
There isn't a degree of punishment in hell. But those that know what they're missing in heaven, it's going to be worse on them. It's personal.
Yeah, I
agree with that, Judy. I think that there is this sense that maybe the punishment in its exactness isn't different, but the fact that I had the ability to avoid that place will gnaw at me for eternity. That I had all the knowledge and all the opportunity and everything I needed to avoid that condemnation, but I chose not to, will certainly be an added hardship if that's the fate that we're found with.
Even now, like ignorance of the law, ignorance of man's law, of the government law, is not a reason to not get in trouble. But if you can't know what you don't know, and it's our responsibility as Christians, knowing the truth, to share that so that other people can, be spared the consequences. And like she said, when you know the truth and you're faced with the punishment at the end, it is going to be worse for you because you knew and you did nothing.
I believe Paul wrote to those in Thessalonica, he said that when the Lord returns in flaming fire, seeking vengeance upon those who know not. They chose not to know, but we've got an obligation then to share that message. And I may bring that up because I've heard other people say at times that well, if it's the case that ignorance is bliss, that I'm not obligated so long as I don't know, if that be true, the worst thing I could ever do is share the gospel with them, right? If ignorance is bliss and I'm allowed to be willfully ignorant, then the worst thing I could do would be share truth with them, and the Bible doesn't share that message at all. It tells us the exact opposite. We must share truth with them. We have to share the message with them in order to aid them in coming to the right conclusions about what they should do with the gospel.
You're good, Gary. You're good. Go ahead.
The more resources, the more knowledge we have, and the talents that we have, we need to use those because it gives us more responsibilities.
Yeah.
And then that brings more responsibilities if we have that knowledge and the use of it.
Gary, I
firmly believe the more we exercise ourselves in those responsibilities, the greater our faith will grow. I mean, they go hand in hand. It's not a punishment. Right? God, Jesus isn't punishing these guys by giving them extra responsibilities. They have great privilege along with that. He's just telling them, you can't sit back and go, well, we're the chosen, and so we'll just sit back here and just wait to receive reward. He says, no, with that privilege comes an even greater weight of responsibility. And as they'll exercise themselves, and as we will exercise ourselves in those responsibilities, it'll actually help us grow. The challenges we find ourselves in is when we don't exercise ourselves into things that we've been taught.
When Paul talks in chapter Romans about the invisible things, the creation of the world clearly seen, they are without excuse. And because that when they knew God, they glorified Him not as God, either were thankful because they became vain in their imagination. Yeah. So there's no excuse.
Right. The opportunities are there, and I've always
been a firm believer that when God talks about seek and ye shall find, knock and the door shall be opened unto you, I firmly believe if there's an open, honest heart out there that would be receptive to God's truth, He'll find a way to get that truth to them. And that's a conviction of faith. But I believe if I understand the way the Scriptures work and what God's intent and purposes are, if there's an open heart out there, God will find a way to get that message to them. And that ups that responsibility that we have because of that.
We can't try to just force it on people. Yeah. We got to just give it to them and hope they receive it.
That's right. They have to choose it.
Choose it, right, Jim? They've got to choose to respond to that message. And our job is just to simply to share it. And they have the responsibility then to recognize it.
Result of not knowing what you have committed is you receive fewer stripes. Now, if this is not in reference to punishment in the new era, then is it in reference to how you are judged?
Bob, it could have more specific reference than what I'm giving it. I guess because he didn't say that a citizen of the kingdom of mine, if they don't honor their responsibilities, I'm gonna punish them with many stripes. But if they had a little less understanding, I'll punish them. He's using a story, right? He's talking about your household here in town there where he was that has a home with a lord over it and servants. So he's using this story. I don't necessarily take as verbatim exactly the same connection to what happens in judgment. Does that make sense? So I don't look at this parable and go, exactly what he's saying is happening in the parable is exactly what's going to happen in the day of judgment. I think he's using it in a broader sense than that. I think he's trying to teach a principle rather than a specific of degrees of but I'm just telling you what I've concluded in my own study as it relates to that.
Last night, and this may connect with what we were talking about. I was reading in Hebrews, I can't remember what chapter it was, about how Father chastises his children. And we will receive chastisement, but it's not for if we know we are saved and we've accepted the gospel, done the things of God, we're saved. But a father will chastise his child. Yeah. And I think even the language even says, not in
you're illegitimate. Yeah. And God continually tries to shape and form and direct His children. He doesn't just get them and then leave them. He chastises them, corrects them, does what He has to keep them guided in the right directions. I got hands everywhere, but I'll try to come around everywhere. Go ahead, Diane, back there in the back.
All said and done, hell is a terrible place to go.
Yeah.
With a few stripes committed.
Yeah.
What you said is right. It's a parable, and it's a comparison of punishment, not how punishment's going to be for me. You're not going to get as many stripes as I am. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think the danger of that mindset, Bill, is that it's as if we're going to sit back and go, I think I can take a few. I think I can take that, right? Because that's the mind. It's hell was hell, right? The condemnation is the punishment is severe, and it would be
foolish, for lack of a better word, to try to think, well, maybe I could withstand a lighter degree. Again, I don't think that's the principle at all that he's sharing.
I'll say it's forever.
That's right. The eternal nature of that
is concerning.
We have to keep in mind that this is a servant who, because the Lord was delaying, purposed in his heart to, I'm going to do whatever I want. So willingly disobeyed.
Yeah, that's a great.
We didn't talk about that, but that's a great addition to the storyline that might help us appreciate a few things that Jesus is trying to illustrate, because the many stripes came to the one that wasn't just derelict in his duty. He thought in his mind, well, the Lord maybe he ain't coming back at all. He's been away a long time. I think I'll just sit back and get drunk, and that's the story, right? And do whatever I want, because I don't think he may never come back. Maybe that's the greater message here. The warning is for us, just because Jesus is taking and being patient before his return, don't consume yourself with the idea that maybe he's not coming, and I can do whatever I want because he's not coming back, can't catch me anyway. I think there is some very strong, willful attitudes. I think I said.
Just to go along with it, God isn't out there trying to catch us doing things that are wrong. It's the opposite. He's trying to give us time to realize the mistakes that we're making, or to do better, to, follow our responsibilities better. And if we make a mistake, then, we'll get chastised, but it's not out of, anger, or out of, well, not necessarily anger, but it's not out because he's trying to, you messed up, now you're in big trouble. He's trying to give us time. And, the one guy is like, well, I don't care about any of that, I'm going to do whatever I want. And, versus taking that as I really appreciate that I'm getting more time to try and do what's right.
God isn't hiding around the corner, hoping that he'll catch a glimpse of you or I stepping out of line. God is actually out in front trying to lead us and correct us and chastise us and reprove us, whatever's necessary to keep us doing the right things. And our mindset about how God functions is important.
What's amazing, people today are just like people back then. It's the same message.
Yeah.
They still won't reject it.
It's interesting, isn't it, that though the times have changed in a lot of ways, but
the attitudes and dispositions really haven't. People had opportunity to hear it, and they rejected, and some received. Same thing happens today as well. Did I see anything in the background?
I keep looking at the fact verse. It says, "You did not know it." It's based on God judging the person, but he understands why he's receiving the judgment. It's not the fact that they're getting the same punishment, they're getting stripes. Yeah. But it's how, I think the verse is dealing more how they're being judged as compared to knowing it or not knowing.
And I think in the
storyline, I think that is accurate. That the judgment that the Lord of that house brings on those servants varies based on what responsibility levels they had been given. My only thought relates to that is how literal does that translate over into the judgment? That's the only challenge I have. Is it figurative to try to just drive the point home that judgment is coming? And again, you may be perfectly right there.
Talents. Each of those men had ability. 1 5, 1 2, 1 1, but they all still had responsibility.
Yeah.
Differing degrees of responsibility, right. but they all had responsibility.
Right.
And maybe maybe a lesson within that then would be, if I'm the 5 talent, let's bring in that parable of the talents. If I'm the 5 talent man, and I don't honor that responsibility, I can't go to the Lord and say, well, listen, I did at least as much as the 1 talent guy did. Why don't I receive the reward? If the 1 talent man would have at least gotten some interest on what he had been given, the master of the house said, I would have rewarded you for that. You could have at least got some interest on that. So he would have been rewarded had he done that. And the reward also came to the man who had a fewer, 2. So, no, you're fine, Bill.
Those men had differing abilities.
Yeah.
Differing talents.
Yeah. And
so the two-sided lesson of that is, if I'm the 1 talent man, then use the 1 talent and use it wisely in the purposes of God, and he'll reward you, even though the level of responsibility may have been less than the 5 talent. 5-talent man needs to use those 5 talents, use them wisely, and he'll be rewarded. But he can't sit back and say, well, I did it just as much as that guy. No, you had greater responsibilities because you had been given more privilege and opportunity. Maybe that's kind of the picture here that's going on.
Also the parable, the Lord who goes out and says, I'm going to hire X amount of men. You can work for this amount of money. And, some men start in the morning, some men start now before the end of the day. They all get paid the same. But the guy who started in the morning, I'm like, hey, I did more work. Why am I not getting paid more? Well, you agreed to this amount of money, just like they did. So, you're still getting what you signed up for. Just because we may have more responsibility or because we may have more talents doesn't mean that we're getting anything different. It just means that we have more time, responsibility, etc.
And I would surely hope that none of us would go into heaven with the idea of, why is he here? You know what I mean? Right? And what I mean by that is well, I had, look at all these talents that I used and look at all these great responsibilities. And that guy barely got by. But you understand? So we got to kind of get that out of our heads. He's going to use what responsibilities he's been given. I'm going to do what responsibilities I've been given, and we're both going to serve the Lord, and we're going to be rewarded for that. Yeah. In that sense.
People at different times of the day, but they were all paid the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and
I apologize that Megan and Bill and I were having a conversation in front of y'all, but
anyway, those are great illustrations. I think what he's driving at here. Any other thoughts about that section before I move on?
Appreciate.
That's right. He's not going to make
me be responsible for what the second and fourth talents that he gave to the 5-talent man if I don't have those.
We know what the master of the house told us to do, and we see someone who isn't doing his job. Is it our responsibility to tell him?
I think,
and it gets into our watchman conversation of the day, I think in some ways, not necessarily as if I had been, if that's part of the responsibilities God has bestowed upon me in some senses, you understand what I mean? If, maybe the servant that was over all the other servants in that household, he would have had an responsibility to say to the one who was being slothful, you were told to sweep that floor. And I think, so in some senses, yeah, I think that we are here to encourage one another and remind one another to accept the roles and responsibilities God has given us and to live up to those responsibilities. I think, and again, we've got to find the appropriate ways. It may not be a trumpet in our hand all the time, as we studied in the sermon. It may just be a quiet reminder, a peaceful reminder. But I think we do have some responsibilities to one another, to encourage each other to fulfill the roles and purposes God has given us.
God has given us some responsibilities, Brian, to keep us busy until He returns.
Yeah. There's plenty to do.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You know how many talents we've been given, and if we use them.
If you didn't
hear the question was, how do we know how many talents we have and whether we've used them all? Well, I think some of them will be obvious. You know what I mean? So, for example, time. Right? Let's use time as an example of what we've been allotted. The opportunities that time presents to each of us are slightly different, right? And depending on the kinds of other responsibilities that we have in the moment. But you want to do something scary? So if you're familiar enough with technology and you have a phone, pull up the log of how long you stared at Facebook on your phone. Just pull the log up. And some of you are going, what's Facebook? Good for you, by the way. But it'll so right, and what I'm trying to illustrate is there may be some more obvious ways to know that if I pulled up the log on how long I stared at Facebook today and I was up for 12 hours and 6 of them were spent staring at that, then I'm probably not using my time very wisely, right? So some will be obvious and others are more challenging. I admit that others would be more challenging to kind of know. But at times I think honesty, maybe that's the answer to that, is just be honest with yourself. All of us, be honest with ourselves about what our talents really are and what I could do. And am I really just pushing that off, or could I really actually be doing that? And I know, and I sometimes I even look at see what skill sets have I used in other areas of my life, whether it be job related or whether it be volunteerism or hobbies. What skill sets have I used in those areas that could easily translate over into the work of the gospel? And am I doing that? Am I using the very same talents that I use in other circumstances? Am I using them to aid others? Can I cook a meal for myself? Well, yeah. Well, then I could probably cook a meal to help somebody else out, right? Could I sew? Well, then maybe I could. Somebody needs to. Can I? And everybody's going, oh yeah, you pick the two that I can do, Brian. Thanks a lot. Now it's guilting me, but no. But you get the point, right? If I'm using those skills in other areas of my life, then I should be able to translate those over and use them in service to the King as well. Helpful or not, I don't know, Marlene, but that's off the cuff my response to that.
I think finding a good balance between not being complacent but not overdoing, so it doesn't hurt you and it doesn't wear you out, so you can't work for God, right, and to help others. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To overdo.
Finding balance.
Balance is I think is key, and I've told folks along. There's several scriptures that talk about the idea that you've got to have proper respect for self in order to be of help to others, and that includes how much time and energy that I can bring to those circumstances.
People that know you well and people that they can point out some of the talents that you have because they see it.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't recognize certain things, but other people say, well, you do that well. You should maybe try this or try that. Yeah. And sometimes other people can see your talents.
And that's a great point, by the way, because
we could be encouraging each other to see their talents better, right? If we see them and maybe they're kind of thinking, I can't do it, and maybe we see that talent there, then let's encourage it. And maybe they'll step into that a little.
You have to be careful how we use those talents. Are you just to impress men, or
that's right,
we're doing it for God?
Sure. And what's the purpose and motive behind
that?
And also knowing that not all your talents are going to be specifically teaching the gospel to somebody. Teaching the gospel to somebody is important, but maybe behind the scenes helping out teachers' Bible class is also equally important.
They can all translate.
All those talents that we have can translate. Appreciate all the thoughts and comments. Did I even get anywhere today? I'll pick up in verse 49, I guess, Wednesday night. If you would bow your heads with me as we go to God in prayer. Thank you, Lord, for the great day that you blessed us with, the opportunity to worship you and study your will. Help us to take the messages of the day and to bring them into our lives and use them wisely. And thank you again for Jesus and all the hopes and promises found in him. Bring us back tonight, Lord willing, as we worship you some more and appreciate the great privilege of your love for us, and especially the salvation and hope in Jesus. And we pray this through his name. Amen.